So today I bring you a piece of missing history. I'm going to introduce some of you to a person you may not have heard of, but is the shoulders on which Martin Luther King stood. This is what I've been doing in my free time. This is called The Lost Prophet, The Life and Times of Bayard Rustin. So after this sermon, if you are intrigued, if you want more, I propose that this could be a second-hour conversation. So think about that if you're one who would like to delve into this more and have a conversation. I think you're going to find it worthy of it. So on page 249 in this book, author John D'Amelio writes, "Change is contagious, especially in the 20th century when modern technology seems to shrink the size of the planet. The stirrings of a human spirit for dignity in one corner of the globe might reverberate anywhere. The work of a self-effacing, physically frail man in India echoed in the mind of a young artistic Quaker living in Harlem, who then infused an eloquent picture in Alabama with the conviction that the aspirations of his local community might seize the stage of world history." Mahatma Gandhi, Bayard Rustin, Martin Luther King Jr. These are the shoulders and the works of the men I speak of today. But despite their efforts, there is still more work to be done. This week, a Wisconsin Republican election commissioner sent this email to the Urban Milwaukee and the Associated Press. Robert Spindle was saying that Republicans can be proud of the city of Milwaukee that votes 80.2% Democratic, because 37,000 less votes than were cast in 2018 happened in the 2018 election, with the major reduction happening in the overwhelming Black and Hispanic areas. Spindle's message pointed to the Republican efforts to sell GOP candidates to Black and Hispanic voters, including opening party offices in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, holding Black and Hispanic Republic-oriented events, but to the net effect, he noted, to convince them not to vote. Promoting the Republican Cares message, pointing out the many flaws of the Democratic candidates, coupled with a lack of interest, persuaded many voters not to vote. The racial violence of the civil rights era is far from over. Our friends of color have been telling us this for the last 60 years, but it often falls on deaf ears. Mind you, racism is more subtle than the horrific lynchings and the segregation that happened back in the day. But we still have segregation by means of property taxes and the education that is funded. There are elections that are not happening in a way that lets every voice be heard. It has taken the technology of phone cameras to document police profiling of Blacks as proof of violence against these sisters and brothers. The death of George Floyd by the knee of the police is a violence and killing too often evidenced by those in the Black community and not believed in the white community. The fight against racism is not over. The Black population who has endured this American cultural deafness, our selective healing, cannot ignore the eyewitness accounts of injustice still happening everywhere. I'm not going to inform you on the entire life of Gandhi. So many of you know what Gandhi stood for and what he accomplished in India. But what you may not know is one life that he influenced that has changed many of ours. Bayard Rustin made it his duty to live into passive resistance. Bayard was one who brought King into more of an academic understanding of Gandhian pacifism into reality. So who is this Bayard Rustin? He's a gay, black Quaker with a silky tenor voice who became a strategic liberationist, once communist, conscientious objector, and mastermind behind the strategies of MLK's appearances. It was Rustin who told King no armed guards at his house that was bombed in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956. The optics of a peaceful pacifist cannot have guns. Bayard Rustin was one of 12 children raised by his grandparents. His mother, Julia, was very formative in his development, where she was raised in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and educated by Quakers and trained as a nurse. Julia's father was a prestigious minister and connected to the black elite in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Julia was one of the first members in the early chapters of the NAACP in 1909. W.E. Douaire, James Welton Johnson, Mary McLeod Bethune stayed with the Rustins. Religion and activism of liberation theology inherent to Christianity were foundational to Bayard Rustin's character formation and values. If you want to learn more about him, I strongly suggest watching the movie and documentary of his life called Brother Outsider. This will help you better understand the forces and influence of Rustin upon the civil rights movement. Too often we have been left out of accurate history because it is left to the victors to tell. It becomes whitewashed to eliminate the values of a one-dimensional righteous victor known as the white Protestant man. Bayard Rustin's shoulders were the ones upon which King stood on many occasions. Rustin's actions were decades before King's civil rights movement. Rustin was peacefully resisting for the purpose of drawing attention to segregation, inequality on buses, in prisons, for school, and employment. Long before Rosa Parks was arrested for the bus boycott in Montgomery, Rustin had been arrested for the same act of refusing to ride in the colored section of the rear of the bus in Tennessee in 1941. In college, Rustin was engaged with the Communist Party. And then, in 1953, in Pasadena, California, he was arrested for having sex with a man in a parking lot. This arrest and this communist connection are the two events that handicapped his future that could have been in the limelight, and it also provided fodder for his enemies. In 1956, A. Philip Randolph encouraged Bayard Rustin to meet with a young rising activist who we know as Martin Luther King Jr. The reason for this meeting was for Rustin to offer his expertise and counsel regarding the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott that had been in process since December 5th of 1955. What happened in Alabama was something that had already happened in Tennessee almost 14 years earlier. Ultimately, Rustin left the Montgomery bus boycott because of the fear of his communist ties and the homosexual arrest threatening to undermine the movement. Interestingly, the March on Washington movement was a tool of protest that dated back to 1941 during the Roosevelt administration. This march, this earliest march, was designed to provide more working opportunities for African Americans and to desegregate the armed forces. Eventually, President Roosevelt issued an executive order in 1941 to prohibit the discrimination throughout the defense industry, which were under federal contract. This change, or concession of Roosevelt's, was enough to call off the march, greatly disappointing Rustin. 22 years later, on August 28th, 1964, Rustin's long-awaited March on Washington happened. He masterminded the event that we all have come to know as the beacon of the civil rights movement. There were nearly 200,000 people from across the country on that hot, humid August day lining the mall. Martin Luther King declared from the podium in front of the Lincoln Memorial, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit paths of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, 'For whites only.' We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." According to the Brennan Center for Justice in 2021, it was a banner year for new barriers. The right to vote in 19 states enacted 34 laws restricting access to voting, far and away the most in any year in the past decade. The laws imposed were a wide range of voter suppression measures, obstacles such as voting by mail, new voter ID requirements, limitations on what election officials can do to help promote voter access. The modern approach to voter suppression, according to the Brennan Center, can be characterized as a death by 1,000 cuts. These seemingly minor rules, like voter ID, mail voting, resource allocation at polling places, voter roll maintenance, all add up to create significant burdens, particularly on communities of color. Because of longer wait times, fewer polling stations, reduced hours at polling station, and less access to transportation. Sadly, the trials and tribulations still exist and are expanding. King's words, still too relevant. I am not unmindful that some of you have come out here of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. And go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing somehow this situation can and will be changed. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. It is a dream that one day this nation will rise out and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves, and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right down in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountains of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. Martin Luther King's pursuit of justice was from the pulpit, grounded in faith and hope. However, we have grown lax in our faith and our passion and our hopes for justice. My friends, This is not the time to grow weary. We have stepped away from the shoulders that were broadened during the civil rights movement. We must climb back on the shoulders, stand taller, and be heard. We are not going back, and we are not going to lose the ground that these men have won. The shoulders of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King were pierced with bullets to bring them down. Rustin minimized by his sexuality. It is a dangerous journey, but with God beside us, isn't it better to be on this journey than to be with the godless, voiceless, safe, complicit mass? Know this: power thrives on hate. Power is threatened by equality. Power feeds on fear. Power loves silence, complicity, and darkness. This is where it goes to grow. The voting rights and the end of segregation and the quest for equality have not yet arrived. The dream is not here and fulfilled, and nor should we act as if it has been. More shoulders are needed. God is not finished calling prophets, though we resist as reluctant prophets do. We must acknowledge God's love in our heart, God's whispers in our ear, God's word on our lips. If you truly believe that you are the face and the hands and the feet of God, then, my dear reluctant prophets, it is time. It is time to stand up. Stand up. Stand up. This is like teaching first grade again. Stand up and offer your shoulders of privilege for others to stand upon. Stand up to be counted. Stand up to lift others. Friends, it is your shoulders. It is you. It is you and your dreams of righteousness for all which you offer these shoulders. The future depends on it. Please join me with your blue paper. As God is our witness on this day, the words of King tell us, this will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, then this must become true. And so I say, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from the Stone Mountains of Georgia. Let freedom ring from the Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, will we be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.